Hi, and welcome to RAN in Focus, a podcast brought to you by the Radicalization Awareness Network. I'm Maya Rosen, and today I'll be talking to frontline practitioners and experts about the massive impact of technology in preventing and countering violent extremism. In almost every aspect of our work as practitioners, we deal with technology in different shapes and forms. Whether it's the rise of conspiracy narratives online, which has been kind of a big deal the last 2 years or so due to the COVID-19 pandemic, or the networks that recruiters use to radicalize vulnerable individuals. Or on the more positive side, our ability as practitioners to connect more quickly with both vulnerable individuals and with each other. In this podcast, I want to try and help practitioners understand how they can really work better with technology in their PCVE work, rather than just being afraid of the negative aspects of it. I want to welcome our first guest. She is going to give us a broad perspective of the impact of technology in PCVE work and the trends that all practitioners should be aware of. Anne Crannan is a senior research analyst at Tech Against Terrorism, an NGO that supports smaller tech platforms in tackling terrorist use of the internet. Welcome, Anne. Thank you for talking to me today.
Of course, I'm delighted to be here.
You're working at Tech Against Terrorism, right? Could you just give our listeners a background story and explain how you guys are really helping smaller organizations and practitioners to better understand and navigate in the tech world?
Yeah, of course. Tech Against Terrorism, it's a public-private partnership supported by UNCTED. So we launched in 2017. And what we do is we support the global tech sector in countering terrorist use of their services whilst respecting human rights. So first of all, we do outreach. So we detect terrorist content on tech companies, and then we reach out to them and basically make them aware of this. And then we hopefully take them to the second pillar. So that is knowledge sharing. So this is really where we provide practical support. And then thirdly, we also work with developers. So we actually design our own technology that is aimed at disrupting terrorist use of the internet further. Our main aim is to help smaller tech companies, because we've seen that as bigger tech companies have invested in content moderation and disrupting terrorist use of their services, terrorist and violent extremists have paid attention, and we've seen an adversarial shift whereby these actors have moved to smaller tech companies. And this is a massive issue because they often don't have the resources to deal with that exploitation.
And you've also developed a platform called the Terrorist Content Analytics Platform, right? Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
What it does is we identify URLs that contain terrorist content, and then we send them to the tech companies that are hosting such material. And we've been doing this since the end of November 2020. And so far, we've sent over 12,000 URLs to about 70 tech companies. And overwhelmingly, we've seen that 94% of that content has been taken offline in the days following our alerts. I would say that we've really seen a massive focus on governments designing legislation that aims to tackle online harms and aims to regulate the online space. And I would say that this is going to likely continue in 2022, but we'll also see some of these forms of legislation actually come into effect and being implemented. So in some of these legislations, such as the Online Harms Bill in the UK, to actually impose liability on them if they don't detect or remove the content, that is quite a drastic measure. If these regulatory frameworks don't actually define terrorism better, but also connect it to terrorist content, I fear that they won't be as effective in achieving their ambitious and good aims. I also hope that we'll see a bigger focus on the designation of terrorist groups, because at the moment, lots of Islamist groups are designated, but on the far right, this is greatly lacking.
And what trends have you seen over the past 2 years to the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think the most agreed upon trend is evidently the overlap between different forms of online harms. So you can start with COVID disinformation, but you'll end up at incel ideology, conspiracy theories, or far right white supremacy narratives as well.
So just to sum this up, what advice can you give practitioners who want to better understand and adopt and use tech in regards to PCVE?
So I think I'd make sort of 3 points. I think first I'd say that there's still a bit of a narrative whereby we think that the tech sector doesn't want to help disrupt terrorist use of the internet. But the majority of platforms, wants to work with us. And I think it's very important to move away from that narrative and for practitioners to actually engage and work together with tech on this topic. I think second, I would say, one of the main misconceptions is also that we see sort of tech companies always as being large in nature, whilst actually this is very different. So if we always assume that tech companies are large, that means that we also think they have the capacity and expertise to actually counter terrorist exploitation of their services, whilst in reality this is very different. And coming back to the legislation point, if we continue to design legislation that will only be achievable for larger tech companies, then I think we risk not effectively countering terrorist use of the internet, but also undermining, tech diversity and sort of diversity of the internet.
Three amazing bullet points. Thank you so much for talking to me, Anne.
Well, you're very welcome. They were great questions, truly.
Talking to Anne, I'm really impressed with what you said about we have to stop thinking about tech companies as these large companies who always have the experience or the knowledge to combat terrorist use of the internet. So I think of social media platforms and tech companies as these large enterprises that are too distant for me to even think about. I really want to discuss what we can help them with and what they can help us with. And also what kind of tools there are to actually help navigate the tech world. So much of the digitalization and advancements in tech that we just discussed with Anne are the tech companies and platforms, particularly social media platforms themselves. And this is going to be the subject of our next discussion, where we'll be talking about how we can improve cooperation and communication with social media and tech companies for our common goal. Our next guest is Joshua Fisher Birch, a researcher in the area of terrorism, extremism, technology, and political violence. Joshua works for the Counter-Extremism Project, a non-profit international policy organization formed to combat the growing threat from extremist ideologies. Welcome, Joshua.
Hi, Maya. How are you?
So nice to meet you, Joshua.
Nice to meet you, too.
So as we head into this new year, 2022, what role do you see technology and the tech world play in PCVE in this new year and maybe in the future?
It's really important that at some level online resources exist for people who think that they're being recruited to some degree by extremists, or they think that friends or family members are being recruited, or even just sort of really encountering extremist propaganda. But whatever it is, it's really important that these outreach efforts are authentic and are not punitive. That the knowledge that younger people who are kind of getting involved in PVE and CVE work that they're bringing to the online environment is really going to be crucial. So whether it's knowledge on technology or different platforms, memes, or online subcultures.
You've called for social media platforms and social media companies and tech companies to take more action and adopt policies to stop the misuse of social media and online tools by extremists, influencers, right? And extremists in general. Do you see any evidence of that being done?
I mean, absolutely. It's definitely happening. That being said, there's still a great deal of room for improvement. So the Counter-Extremism Project finds, unambiguously extremist content on a variety of platforms that companies have failed to remove even after it's been reported. In addition to this, it's not only a question of whether or not companies are taking action, but it's also about when they're taking action. So is it after a potentially violent movement has made hundreds of discussion groups on their platform, or is it earlier? Are they going to make an attempt to, nip this in the bud as the movement is growing across their platform? But overall, the more pressure there is on tech and social media companies, the more seriously they're going to take this issue.
That's so interesting. And we as practitioners, we have a responsibility as well to push them a bit, I feel like. We have to be part of the pressure.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's incredibly important to remember that while working in this space.
But do you think that it's possible for social media companies or enterprises to cooperate together more on this, exchange information and knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. And, many social media companies already cooperate on these issues through the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism. And hopefully, now that this has really been recognized as such a serious problem. Hopefully that this cooperation will increase over time.
How can we as practitioners work more with social media companies and tech platforms to support each other to kind of tackle this threat together?
There's the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, which includes practitioners and different researchers. There's the organization Tech vs. Terrorism. There are in-house research and content moderation teams, and there are other groups and initiatives that bring together practitioners and researchers and social media companies. And also, less spoken about are informal networks for people who are working in this space to speak privately and directly and exchange information and share concerns. That's also very important.
But now, as we're entering a new year, what do you think we'll be discussing at the end of 2022? What will be like reflecting on, discussing?
I think that one of the larger issues is going to be further attempts by extreme right and white supremacist groups who are going to attempt to recruit individuals in the anti-vaccine movement. And also, I mean, the continued use of access-controlled cloud-based platforms for sharing extremist content. I think that just in general, as the world of online extremist content, as it becomes more inhospitable for that to be posted on a wide variety of sites, it's something that you can already see now where things are, in very specific cloud password protected environments. So I think that 2022 in many cases is going to be kind of a continuation of things that we've seen in the past, possibly with other technologies and other disruptions mixed in there. But those are the things that I think we should be looking out for in the next year.
Thank you so much, Joshua. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you. It's very informative.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really wonderful. I really enjoyed the discussion.
So speaking to Joshua, he says that social media companies and tech companies are doing a lot, but we also have to keep pressuring them to do more. And how we as practitioners can actually be a part of pressuring them and pushing them to do more. I think that's very important. And of course, also what he said about including young people, because young people really grew up in the social media space. So today we've heard a lot about the tech landscape. We've heard about the different trends in terrorist use of tech and the role being played by social media companies and platforms. But what does this all mean for us as practitioners? Should we be terrified or actually hopeful about the increasing significance of tech? Our next guest is Ross Frennett, founder of Moonshot CVE and also the RAN co-lead for the Communications and Narratives Working Group. Welcome, Ross.
Hey, Maya, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. So just to start this off, could you just tell me a little bit, briefly about yourself? Who are you and how did you get into this area?
I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of an organization called Moonshot. We develop technology and methodologies to understand and counter extremism and other online harms across the EU and the wider world.
Impressive. So up until this point, we've kind of talked about how the digital world and the tech world can be a little intimidating for practitioners who aren't really familiar with it. Do you think that we as practitioners can be a bit nervous or scared when it comes to thinking about tech in regards to PCVE?
If you work on these issues, then you are working with people who are, operating online. So you have to include a digital component. All prevention activities should have a digital component. Moonshot looked at the way technology was being talked about in counter-extremism circles and just wanted to turn the conversation on its head. All we were talking about was how extremists were using it and how we could counter them. And very few conversations were starting with, okay, how can we use this? How can we repurpose advertising? How can we use direct messaging apps? How can we reach people with support? How can we use bots to provide assistance to people and create new and interesting ways to push back against extremism and build resilience?
I've been involved in RAN Young for many years, since I was 18. And something that we've discussed a lot is social media literacy. Is it important to train your own social media literacy?
I think it's not about one training module. It's not about one handbook. And I more think it's a mindset. It's more akin to keeping up to date with the news. So I do think that lots of organizations, depending on their size and even individuals, just need to get themselves in the habit of staying on top of this stuff, because you can be absolutely certain that extremists are.
What can we do to help understand the tech more in our PCV work?
It's a good question. I think the thing that we need to do is to look at your mission and then go from there rather than looking at technology and going from there. Because I've seen quite a few organizations say, "Oh, we need to use Facebook." It's like, wait, why?
Yeah.
Like what? Because maybe they read it in a manual, maybe they've heard about it, maybe whatever. There may be organizations that Facebook is really well suited for. There may be organizations that a blog is really well suited for. But for each organization, they need to fundamentally look back at what their mission statement is and then match that with a technical strategy. So I think there's sometimes this misunderstanding of those of us who are advocating the use of technology that we're saying that, oh, that means that everyone should set up a Twitter account and start tweeting. Like, no, if that's not suitable for you or your charity or your NGO or your work, then absolutely don't do it. Specialize. And build technology to accelerate your mission. Don't bolt technology onto your offering in an ad hoc way, because that's not going to work. It's just going to waste your time.
Yeah. So we have to find ways to kind of incorporate technology in our already existing work, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Pick the platforms that are useful for you, specialize in them, develop expertise in them, and then stay on top of them. And you'd be amazed at how quickly, as a small organization that deeply knows your audience, if you've selected the right tools, how quickly you yourself become an expert if you play around with things, if you experiment, and if you give your staff the freedom to do that as well.
So what do you think that the RAN practitioners working group that you are co-lead for is doing well to help practitioners in this space and in this field?
So we've been mostly focused on emerging threats like the conspiracy theories. We've been looking at the use of video game platforms. And with all of that, we've been trying to encourage practitioners not just to see these things as a threat, but to see them as an opportunity.
What will we be discussing and reflecting on at the end of 2022 in December? Do you have any predictions?
The challenge for all of us actually as practitioners is finding our place. And by that, I mean, when I started work on extremism, it was almost completely apolitical. It was very easy to have kind of extremism over here, and then there was a different area that was disinformation, and there was a different area that was politics. Yeah. Across the EU and across the Western world more broadly, the lines between these areas are becoming blurred in a way that's very, very dangerous for counter-extremism practitioners, because it's essential for us to engage with conspiracy narratives because they fuel extremism. But some of those conspiracy narratives are also connected with politics, and it's absolutely crucial that we do not become political and we don't politicize ourselves. All of us as practitioners are going to have to work very hard to navigate that increasingly complex system.
Thank you so much for talking to me, Russ. It's been super informative, really. Thank you.
Not at all. It's been wonderful to speak to you.
Speaking to Russ, I think my main takeaway is the fact that tech really comes with a few negative aspects, but also so many opportunities. And also, again, social media literacy, the fact that it's not a choice. I like what he said about start with your mission. And there are always, tech spaces that are suitable for your work, but you have to start with your mission, the mission of your organization. And I think that's a great first step. Thank you to all of my guests for speaking to me today and to really, discussing this important and very, very relevant topic. And I hope this becomes more of a frequent discussion in every PCV area. And thank you to you all for listening. And I really hope you can join me in the next episode of RAN in Focus.